This is the best of the Punk Rock and Politics podcast, number 3, the international version. Let's do this.
These days are strange, it's true.
I would bomb the shit out of them.
If you think that punk rock doesn't mix with politics, you're wrong.
When I first started the Punk Rock and Politics podcast, I wanted to interview bands about political and social topics from all across the United States. But as the podcast grew, so did the audience. We now have listeners from all over the world, and I would consider this podcast to be an international endeavor, which has led me to interview many cool bands from all across the world. And that's why when I was trying to think of a theme for this best of episode, I thought, why not do an international version? So here we go. And the first band we'll be featuring on this Punk Rock and Politics episode number 3 international version is 1919. We had Rio Goldhammer, the vocalist for the band 1919, on as we talked about President Trump and Brexit. So here's some clips from my conversation with Rio Goldhammer from episode 29. But first, here's Red Flag by 1919.
Look round the French, my love says blaze. Destiny jam, my chances praise. In Moscow falls, he seems to say. Chicago swells, the searching for. Till racial skull and standard high. Within its shade, we'll live and die. The cowards flinch and traitors stare. We'll keep the red flag flying here. Then waves above, infant fight. When all ahead seem dark as night. Hey, witness me, a day and now. We must not change its color now. The race will skull and standard high. Within its shade, we'll live and die. The cowards flinch and traitors stare. We'll keep the red flag flying here. The world recalls the giant past. It gives a hope of peace at last. The banner bright, the simple plain of human rights.
anything that's going on in UK or anywhere else, I always liken Bernie Sanders to Jeremy Corbyn. Do you know anything about Bernie Sanders?
Oh yeah, look, I love him.
Yeah,
Absolutely love him.
Yeah.
There's so many similarities, and even down to the fact that, I mean, if you'd put Bernie Sanders in a race with Trump for the presidency, all the polls said that Sanders would have wiped the floor with him,
exactly,
and you'd be in so much of a better situation now. The problem was it was his own party, it was the Democratic Party, wasn't it, that basically undermined him and put too many bricks up so they could get their person, they could get their their candidate in, which was Clinton. And actually, the Labour Party, my party, I'm a paid up member, proudly so, but a lot of the people in the party to begin with tried to do the same thing. That's why they called for a second leadership election. That's why we had to go out and win again.
Yeah, I found an entire 2-minute sound clip of all Labour MPs talking like trash about Corbyn and how he'll never win and how he's no vision of the future and blah blah blah. That's not a Labour Party they want to be a part of. I mean, it wasn't that hard to find that clip either. But
no.
Exact same thing.
The positive thing is that, I mean, everyone's sort of, all the people that didn't want Corbyn as leader in the party, it was just because they didn't believe he could win over enough support in the wider public to win an election. And if you don't win an election, ultimately you can't change people's lives for the better at all.
Yeah.
But now everyone's kind of eating humble pie, and publicly so. They're coming out and saying, I was wrong. Great.
Well, that's okay.
And that's cool.
Yeah, we have so many similarities between politics, but that is not one similarity, because we have the Hillary Clinton and the neoliberals who are just, creating this Russian thing. Let's kind of dive into that. What do you think about the Russian conspiracy that hacked the election, more or less? Because that's kind of what the Hillary Clintonites and the liberals, they don't want to, as you say, eat humble pie.
No, and actually I've noticed that, they are still hell bent on this idea that actually only a technocrat, centrist, corporate Democrat can win.
Yes.
Even though that keeps being shown time and time again not to be the case, even as recently as the Georgia Senate race.
Yeah. The one that just happened. That was like a deep red. That would be kind of like the race you ran in your documentary. It would be kind of what it's like, you weren't going to win, but you did it because you wanted to do it and kind of throw some ideas out there.
Yeah, well, I mean, Labour stands in every seat in the country and contests everything, even if it's a really stab in the dark, but
right.
And that's great.
Which see here, Obama tried that, called the 50-state strategy, or Howard Dean, and then Obama tried it, but they kind of gave up on that and just said, we're going to only focus on a few key strategic areas, and that's really what destroyed them, because they took certain areas for granted. And the thing, like you said, how they're hell-bent on staying this liberalist, neoliberal, globalist party, but I think that neoliberalism, globalism, race to the bottom is what created Trump and UKIP and Brexit. That's what created these things. But people don't want to call out, they want more of this neoliberalism to try to fix this problem that neoliberalism created. What do you think about that?
Oh yeah, 100%. It's that whole thing about you can't just keep dumping toxic waste in the river for 20 years and then be surprised when a giant toxic monster comes out of it. Right? And
Trump
and Brexit are those monsters, giant radioactive sewage monsters that we've made ourselves.
Right. He said he was going to drain the swamp, but he is the swamp monster.
He's like the swampiest swamp person you could ever think. He just puts his family in the cabinet. It's such the chutzpah of that. there's a big generational divide as well, because it's the sort of older generation of people still read the newspapers, and the younger generation actually don't read them all. Actually, when I was campaigning to remain in the EU, I just spent a couple of days getting shouted at by old people, really. But but when the occasional one that would stop and discuss things with me, they talk about people claiming benefits, and I said, look, did you know there's more British people claiming unemployment benefit in like every one of the EU countries apart from Poland that there is vice versa? And they said, well, I find that hard to believe. And I said, well, go home. Look it up then.
Look at that's
said,
the statistics.
No, they said I don't have a computer. And I said, where do you get your information from? Oh, I said, do you read it in the Murdoch press?
Yeah.
And they just sort of laughed and said, oh, he probably owns all the papers, and that was it.
Well,
and you kind of think,
yeah.
Well,
and that's not healthy when one person owns or only 6 companies own 95% of all the media in the world.
Yeah, exactly. And the only thing that's changed that is social media, really, and the fact that. But then at the same time, that's where you get fake news spreading and stuff like that. And people will just share and agree with anything they just see written down just because it's written down.
Or they'll just share it based on the headline and not actually read the article.
Exactly. Yeah. No, I actually tried. I started a petition to see if I could use people just reading the title of things to. Basically, if you get 10,000 signatures on a petition in this country, then it has to get raised in Parliament eventually. So
right.
I started this petition saying, we must leave Europe now. And then the petition itself said that, we must turn Norfolk and Suffolk into a giant engine, which will create thousands and thousands of jobs, and then sail the 14,000 miles southwest until we get to Australia. And we'll just park the UK just above New Zealand, and join. We'll join the Asian economy. And
did you get any signatures?
I got a handful, yeah, but it didn't go as viral. I just wanted to go on the news and say, the thing about this country is if you get just over half the people to agree, it immediately has to become law.
Can you feel my heart?
That was Revenge by 1919, and the next band up is Vile Assembly. I was able to talk with vocalist Paul Mason about homelessness, promoting love, and the corporate media's agenda. Here's some clips from my conversation with Paul from episode number 44. But first, here's Body Bags by Vile Assembly.
They're gonna bring you down, and they don't want you to think they're gonna bring you down, and they don't want you to say they're gonna bring you down, and they don't want you to fail. They're gonna bring you down, they're gonna bring you down, they're gonna bring you down. They're gonna bring you down.
Top 1% now owns more than the bottom 50%. But the news doesn't really talk about that.
I mean, the news isn't going to talk about that because the people who own the media outlets are the ruling classes, and it's their money.
Yeah, exactly. And they actually passed here in America, which is horrible. They passed now a lot of the media conglomerates. They can own 2 stations in one area. Where before you can only own one station in a certain broadcasting district, but now you can own more than one. So it's just going to consolidate the news media like even more.
Yeah, the fear kind of the fear merry-go-round that goes on in the media is incredible. But yeah, we don't necessarily see them talking about how they should be helping the homeless, how they should be helping the people on the streets. It's almost like that the homeless have become a drain on society. Mm-hmm. I read a news report today that the council officials in certain areas are going to look at, because the homeless situation in the UK now is at the highest level it's ever been.
Oh, wow.
And the homeless people now are getting tents on the streets.
Yeah.
And what the councils are saying that they're now looking at passing a bill where they're going to be able to fine them £1,000 for sleeping in a tent on the street. Yeah. Well, my answer is where are you going to send the fine? Mm-hmm. Yeah. Where are you going to post that?
They're doing the exact same thing here. The exact same thing. They're giving them tickets. Yeah. Yeah. Well, and then eventually, if you get so many tickets, you could get arrested. And that's, but then you arrest them and put them in jail, and then you're going to have to pay for their room and board anyways.
Well, and in the UK now, the jails are owned by private equity companies, so they need to make sure that the jails are full. As long as the jails are full, the investors are getting their paycheck and their dividend business. Most incredible merry-go-round ever. At every single stop, the private investors, the ruling classes, the people with the riches are getting even more and more money, while the people without are digging further and further into poverty.
Yeah, the gap is just growing. It's growing exponentially now at this point. And I always enjoy talking. I believe you're the third band that I've had on now from the UK, and I always enjoy talking to musicians and artists from over there in the UK, because I find our political worlds are just, it's so much identical. What's going on? It's not exactly the same, but it's very close. I mean, because you have not Margaret Thatcher. I was going to say Theresa May, who's like a Margaret Thatcher kind of wannabe. She can't even be Margaret Thatcher, but she wants to be. And then you have Jeremy Corbyn, and you also have Bernie Sanders, which I've always been a big Bernie Sanders supporter. And then over there, which he fell short over here of really taking over the Democratic Party and pushing our parties left. So we're going further and further right. But you guys, Corbyn did get a little bit of a win. And so what's your thoughts on Corbyn and the recent election? I guess it was quite a few months ago, almost a year ago now, that Corbyn won.
Well, the media completely tried to ruin Corbyn's campaign over here.
Yes.
And you would have thought the way that the media were presenting it to the public, it was going to be a complete landslide. So the fact that Corbyn came out of this with a high level of credibility means that the job that he's doing is fantastic. Mm-hmm. You can't knock somebody that's saying his most important policy is peace.
They'll try.
But his most important policy is peace. Yeah. And that's the thing that he wants the country to strive for. I mean, I spoke to my partner today, Nina, and we were saying, I think peace, it should be made as a law now. If you don't give peace, you're breaking the law and liable for the rest.
It's pretty, it's pretty simple. I like it.
That's simple. Yeah. We've got like a few different laws. Love, you've got to give love. And if you don't give love out to people, you're going to be arrested.
Made up in limousines and private jets.
I notice that when I'm, on the street, the amount of people that are constantly looking down, nobody's looking at each other. Everybody's looking at this little square piece of plastic that they've got in their hand, and that's the connection. And I suppose in a way, I'm exactly the same. I am connected to my mobile phone, which has got linked up to Twitter, Facebook.
No, me too. Yeah.
It's not real.
Yeah.
There's no reality. It's a completely false reality. There's no reality to that. The reality is that, I am surrounded by humans that I love and humans that love me. And why would I want to ignore that by being completely soaked into this fake reality? I think we need, readdress our understanding of reality and our understanding of love. And if we readdress that, we'd find that most of the things that we're doing on anti-social media are pointless.
Anti-social media.
Yeah,
I like
it's
that.
Pointless. It's a complete non-entity. What would be the point in waiting for somebody to like you that you don't know? You don't know. I imagine that there's a chance that if you met this person that likes what you're saying, you may not like them.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. And I mean, and then, we're fueling it too, because now we have, Trump in office, who he's tweeting all the time, which is, so there's people who are actively always checking Twitter now just to get the update. And it's kind of fueling this cycle, I suppose.
Yeah. And we've got to recognize, I think, that pretty much everything on the media that we're seeing, like the media outlets, is bullshit.
The corporate media. Yeah, definitely.
We can keep that inside ourselves every time we're watching the news or watching television, watching whatever program, as long as we can recognize, don't forget there's an agenda. And then once you keep that premise in your head, whoa, what am I watching? I'm watching this, but there's an agenda. Then maybe you'll start looking at things in a different way. I look at some things in a more comedic way, when really they are pretty serious, terrible things. But I'm looking at them in such a comedic way because I think, well, the agenda. I look at the agenda that's taking place and think, well, this is just ridiculous. Mm-hmm. This is something. If we think about the things that the media are allowing us to know, imagine the things that we don't.
Oh yeah, and you said it perfectly. It's the media, it's their agenda, and before I think you called it the fear merry-go-round. It's fear. They're selling fear because if people are afraid, they want someone to protect them, or they won't question the government or the system because they're afraid, or they'll be okay with the wiretapping or the surveillance on them because, well, we don't want the terrorists to get us now, do we?
Yeah. I mean, the terrorists, when I was a child, I was classed as a terrorist. The things that we did as a child, children knocking on people's doors and being a complete menace to the surrounding houses where we lived, we were known as the neighborhood terrorists. So what we've done with this word is we've just taken it and branched it out and made us think that there's actually a threat out there. Mm-hmm. There's a real threat out there, and we don't. I mean, what the media's tried to do is present it to us in this kind of faceless way that we don't understand what the threat is. But the threat's out there, and it's probably everything that's different to what I am. So it's a different color skin. It's got a different language. It wears different clothes. That's the threat. That's the person I've got to look out for. And I recognized in that American atrocity that took place in Las Vegas, where the guy shot
Las Vegas. Yeah,
he was a white American. Mm-hmm. He wasn't a terrorist. Mm-hmm. He wasn't classed as a terrorist. He was a white American. When they tried to link it to some sort of terrorist organization, the American government said, no, he's not linked to any terrorist organization, because what would they be able to do? They'd have to tell every single person then, it's now not that foreign language, different colored skin, different clothing wearing person. It's now your next door neighbor. The terrorist is now you.
it's the same abuse. Repeating the rhetoric, still trying to fool a whole nation of workers on suppressants to believe in your right when the whole system is rigged. It's all a lie. It's all just a lie. When they want you gone, you're gone, you're gone, you're gone. They won't wait. They won't hesitate. When they want you gone, you're gone, you're gone, you're gone. The powers that be who run this workhouse burn the use from sitting alongside the receivers who deceive us, then spread their filth to believe in your right when the whole fucking system is rigged. It's all a lie. It's all just a lie. When they want you gone, you're gone, you're gone, you're gone. They won't wait. They won't hesitate. When they want you gone, you're gone, you're gone, you're gone. How can we stand accused of these static issues made up of tax burdens, but enforced by fine linen? All these unreasonable things. It's all a lie. It's all just a lie. When they want you gone, you're gone, you're gone, you're gone. They won't wait. They won't hesitate. When they want you gone, you're gone, you're gone, you're gone.
That was Gone by Vile Assembly. And next, and the final band for the Best Of episode is Kids on Bridges. And back on episode number 54, I was able to talk with vocalist Christian Bragg about Brexit and Trump. But before we get to the clips from the interview, here's Bankers to Feed by Kids on Bridges.
Tighten your belts, there's bankers to feed. You've got to keep on spending for the personal greed. Think of my house, think of my car, think of my plane, think of my yacht. My money, so money talks. Money, it bought and sold us all. And spend some more. We'll feed the rich and fuck the poor. Who stole the money? Who stole the cash? Who hit the reddies? Who's got the stash? Who stole the money? Who's got the stash? Who's got the reddies? The dirty, filthy cash. They keep on spending, there's expenses to claim. Manipulate the rates, but still charge the same.
money go? Where did all the money go? It's lining someone's pockets. Where did all the money go? Where did all the money go? Where did all the money go? It's lining someone's pockets. Who stole the money? Who stole the cash? Who hit the readies? Who's got the stash? Who stole the money? Who's got the stash? Who's got the readies? The dirty filthy cash. Who stole the money? Who stole the cash? Who hit the readies? Who's got the stash? Who stole the money? Who's got the stash? Who's got the readies? The dirty filthy cash.
What's your opinion on Brexit? Tell me.
Well, I mean, I was dead against it, even within my parents, you know, because obviously what happened was an older generation voted for it to happen, and which I found was quite ironic to the word that, you know, they originally voted to be in the EU and for all this to grow and educated us to be multicultural, as I mentioned before, and embrace different cultures. And then all of a sudden they're pulling the rug from under the next generation. Wow. And I just don't think any good can come of it. I can understand somebody wanting a country to have an identity and be patriotic, but not at the cost of alienating families that have grown up here. And I think people, when it comes to the vote, were really misinformed about what it was they were voting for. And I think people were generally voting for a race card, and it wasn't about the EU. And when you pull the facts down about why we were leaving the EU, yes, it's crooked, but it's a crooked structure that ultimately was working for all countries involved. In, you know, it might not work for you one month, it might work for Germany the next, but ultimately it worked. Everybody got a bit out of it. It prevents wars, you know what I mean? And I think as the EU starts to crumble, it'll be each for their own, and you'll start to get war and power trip. And I just don't think anything good can come of it. And I don't think people over a certain age should have been allowed to vote because it's affecting a generation. It'll affect a generation from that.
You can't not let people vote. I mean, I have that idea has come to my mind a few times. I'm like, well, if these guys are going to be dead in 4 or 5 years, how are they voting for something that's
my point. That's going to affect, you know.
I know.
And they'll say, we're wiser, we've got knowledge. Yeah, but your wiseness and knowledge put us in this place in the first place. And But
you can't. But you know, as we have to take the moral high ground, and we can't. Actually, I think it was like the last podcast we were talking about how here in America, people in prison they can't vote, which I think that's cool. I think if you're in prison, you should even be able to vote. It's just one vote. Why not?
Yeah,
you know.
I just felt so strongly about ashamed to be British at that point, and like I said, it's. Whatever political party you were voting for at that point, it didn't come down to that to me. It just come down to good humanity, being, and you didn't need to be clever. You could see this bears no good. And like I said, you could have been Conservative, Labour, Liberal. It wasn't about that. It was just about a decision of right or wrong. And like I said, no good comes from it.
What about the Remain camp? Did they not have a good enough campaign and they kind of just expected to win? Because wasn't the Remain, that was up in the polls pretty much the whole way through, wasn't it?
Yeah, they you know what? They thought they were calling a bluff by having the vote. Yeah. They thought that it was never going to happen.
Yeah, because they called the vote. They didn't even have to call it.
They called it. And that's my point. It's like maybe when the world's in a stable condition and everything's flowing, maybe it's something they could have looked at if people were really feeling that patriotic. But they called it. And they had no plan for it. If it happened, hence they didn't win. And they all left. To no consequences, like, oh yeah, okay, we're getting off now. Yeah, and you know, and all of them, and that's not even being questioned, Michael. You think, what, you know, if any role that you did as a job or business, and you called this and it went pear-shaped, you'd be held accountable. And they've all just gone, oh yeah, I'm going to go be a lecturer now. Yeah, I'll resign as the prime minister. You know, and it is laughable. And the campaign, like Michael Gove did with we're spending this much, we'll give it to the nurses. It was broadcast on telly, and it's like fraud. They put it there, they lied on telly. If I was to do that, I'd be put in prison for it. And I just can't believe that the public were duped to that degree.
The Brexit campaign, they were lying on TV, is what you're saying.
Yeah, well, everybody was. You know what I mean?
Well, yeah, that's politicians.
But it's for people to not be able to see that. I mean, to me, it was just common sense. And they were saying, oh, well, we put this much money into the EU. But they forgot to mention, by putting that much in, they were tripling that amount daily, what they were making off it.
Yeah.
And we're just a weaker country now. We're a country that doesn't really produce. We're one of the biggest importers of stuff. So we've got no export. I don't know what we're basing any of this on. And it's almost as it's a little bit like America. It's a distraction to hide failed policies of the past. Yes, and we'll just brush them on, it's like with the Conservative Party. It's like, I know people who had a job in radio 10 years ago, and they had to have a reduction when the recession and the bankers said, if you want to keep your job, you lose 15% of your wage. Right. And 10 years on, they're still on that same wage. And it doesn't get mentioned that, there was an economic upturn. The companies are still earning a little bit more than they were, but you're still on the same wage, and we've got to bite the bullet. And these rich politicians are telling us how to cut your cloth accordingly, while they're spending more on the dinner.
It's a spot for kings.
Thanks for checking out Punk Rock and Politics. If you enjoyed the show and the information brought to you, please subscribe and share the podcast. It helps us here at Punk Rock and Politics, but more importantly, it helps the featured bands gain exposure. Also, if you know any bands or musicians who would like to join the political mosh pit and have their music featured on the Punk Rock and Politics podcast, please email us at punkrockandpolitics@gmail.com. Thanks again, and we'll see you next time. And rock on, political junkies.
I think all of our society is run by insane people for insane objectives.
Doing a better job of talking to each other. The left hand now knows what the right hand is doing.
Look at those hands. Are they small hands? And he referred to my hands. If they're small, something else must be small. I guarantee you there's no problem. I guarantee it.